I often say that a romance novel can touch your heart, a horror movie can scare you, and a documentary can teach you something about the world. Why don't we think of games in that same way? Every game has some sort of political bent to it, even if it's like minor, even if it's like something that we don't necessarily completely acknowledge. I think a lot of people in the gaming sphere are very afraid of trying to do anything that is like controversial, and I say that we should embrace it because people are going to complain about it anyway.
Welcome to the show. You are a Black Multimedia Artist, game designer, and the Director of Civic Story, a political parody game that teaches people about politics and how it affects people. I'm super excited to have you on LLAG Radio. We actually first connected through my People of Color You Should Follow, POC Creators That You Should Follow series on Instagram and Facebook. You reached out about the work that you've done, and you actually reached out recently about your game Civic Story. I had a chance to play a little bit about it. It was really interesting. I'd love to get your thoughts on just game development, politics, education. So let's first start with your inspiration for Civic Story, because this is a very unique game. What sparked that interest?
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar with me, hey, my name is Jordan Sparks. I'm a Black, like Rainier said, I'm a Black Multimedia Artist from Canada, and Civic Story was inspired by many things, and it was actually, at least the start of it was inspired by a moment I had, I think around, was it like 2011 or something around there? We had a moment in Canada where all over the news it said the Canadian government had been defeated. Stephen Harper as government has dissolved. People are going to polls and like all these sort of things. Like government was defeated and dissolved and all these other things. I had absolutely no clue what any of that meant, and it was really frustrating because I was like Googling and stuff, and I was like, everybody has this really high level jargon for explaining what happened that explains absolutely nothing to a regular person. And so it took me longer than it should have to figure out, people had beef in Parliament, there's going to be an election soon. That was basically it. And so I had an interest in politics even before that, just in terms of like understanding it, but I didn't actually understand it. And then from then on, I was just like actually looking up things and trying to understand things, even though trying to do so is not really easy. And it's kind of hard to understand how this thing affects me personally whenever a politics comes up. And I found that really telling to not only myself, but even a lot of other people who had zero to little interest in politics, who may misunderstand certain things or just don't understand how a lot of things work. And so ever since that day that I just had no clue what was going on, I was just plagued by this question of how does everything work? So at the time I didn't plan to make a game on it. It was just me trying to like learn and also help other people learn and just understanding everything. But eventually I started getting into making video games by accident, and then I didn't really know what kind of game I wanted to make. And there's like plenty of stuff. Like you can make shooters, you can make Mario, you can make like a Galaga clone. There's all sorts of different games that you can make, but it was not really anything that I was really passionate about making. And then there was a game that I played that got recommended to me in a video on YouTube called Loneliness by Jordan Magnuson. And Jordan Magnuson created this game called Loneliness, and I highly recommend everybody go and play that. It only takes like not even 5 minutes to play to completion, and it made me feel more than any game I've ever played. And it's a game about dots, just black dots. That's all it is. And I decided from then that's the type of game that I want to make. A game that makes me feel and talks about certain like cultural topics. And so I ended up Civic Story ended up becoming was the very first game that I really got passionate about making. It wasn't the first game I ended up making because I wanted to make a game about politics. I just didn't really know what form that would take. I made several different other games about psychology and music and like another one called Another, which you should definitely play. I'm not going to say what it's about, but I made a whole bunch of different games about different types of topics, and then but I've always had that the idea for what became Civic Story in the back of my mind, and so I would just gradually grow it, come up with new ideas, and then finally back in the end of 2020, when I finally was able to get funding for it, I finally went and tried to make the game, and now it is out. It just came out this summer.
Wow, that's really cool, because I'm really glad that you touched on the inspiration of playing. Oh, sorry, what was the game? The one with the dots?
Loneliness.
Loneliness. I think it's really interesting because, you know, for me, in my experience as a gamer, I grew up, you know, in the 90s where video games were seen to rot your brain. And I guess I always had that sensation that, like, no, I feel like video games are more than that. Like, it's more than just, you know, chess in a different format. But like you said, it can teach you something deeper. It's more than just an opportunity to be competitive and shoot things, but like you can cut to another level and actually teach people things that can be applicable outside of that gaming world. How do you want your gamers to feel? You know, different game devs want people to feel empowered. They want them to feel like afraid. How do you want your gamers to feel, and what do you want them to walk away with once they finish completing Civic Story?
Yeah, I'm always thinking about that, especially in my games. And when it comes to a lot of game developers, you ask them how they want them to feel, you'll probably tell you that you want the player to have fun and be empowered and all the other stuff. I'm a little bit different. I love games that are fun and all that stuff, but it's not really what interests me in terms of how to like the games I really want to make. Because I want the people who play my games to feel like they learn something, or that there's something that they're critically thinking about that applies to them, or that could affect people around them. I want people to see the world differently once they finish my games. And I often say in my my company, Shine Spark Entertainment's sort of mantra, which is to shine a light on our culture to spark social change. And so I really want people to play my games and feel changed from those experiences, and actually feel like they are critically examining stuff that actually is applicable to real life, and starting those conversations that they otherwise wouldn't have. That's what I think is really useful when it comes to games, because I'm not knocking like other mediums like books and films and stuff like that, but you are often a passive observer of all these different things. The beauty of video games, I find, is that you actually have agency. You are driving the story forward, or something forward, and you can be a part of that mythology. And you aren't saying that so and so killed the dragon. You're saying I killed the dragon. You have ownership over those decisions. And I think that's what's interesting if you start to approach like different types of very sensitive subject matter in games, and especially if you do it in a tasteful way, because it can be done very untastefully. You could start having the player really start questioning themselves and how the stuff that they actually just played relates to stuff that actually happens to them or that they have seen. And I find that becomes a really good motivator for conversations that we can have with each other to better understand each other and create a better world, so we can actually start those conversations that we otherwise would not want to have because it's so taboo. And politics is one of those things that is seen as taboo, and I don't really think as a society we have anymore the vocabulary or the capacity to talk about it on any meaningful level in a lot of ways. And I want people to sort of be able to have that vocabulary and be able to start talking about these issues and how they might affect themselves and other people and why they should care. I think that there's a lot of apathy and misinformation and really disillusionment a lot in politics that leads people to either be like, not care or radicalized or do or think things that are not necessarily true, and not have that ability to or at least the desire and motivation to understand it. And I want Civic Story to inspire that love of understanding things before you start jumping to conclusions.
That's really cool. That excites me because I feel like I'd love to have more gaming experiences that let you take away something other than just that was a fun ride, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I'm glad that there have been more games that have come out talking about mental health, shining a light on that. But I feel like, you know, similar to the way Civic Story is really, you know, you can talk about voting, you can talk about political engagement. And even though there are games that will have political themes to it, there aren't often games that are like political in nature, right? And so,
yeah,
like, my question is, you making this game, I'm sure that you felt, on one hand, there have been games who have done it right, similar to Loneliness, and I'm sure that there are probably others that, you know, hit a certain mark that made a good point about their politics, you know, with the storyline or whatever. But then there are also probably games where you're like, oh my God, this is like horrible. Like it's at this point ahistorical. It is at this point damaging to people's understanding of politics, because there's plenty of those games that are around.
Mm-hmm.
So can you contrast with me, in addition to Loneliness, like what games get it right, which games are bad?
So I actually will sort of sidetrack that question just slightly, because I think that we shouldn't be having the conversation of which games get it right, which ones get it bad, because I think that every single game is part of that argument to some point. And I'll give you an example. Every game has some sort of political bent to it, even if it's like minor, even if it's like something that we don't necessarily completely acknowledge. These are something that's the political circumstances around these games affect them, be it how they're made or even the stuff that's featured in them. And I'll give you a good example. If you play a game like, and I don't play many of these games, not just because I hate them or anything, just they're not my thing, but Grand Theft Auto. I believe if you die in the middle of the game or something like that, like you go to the hospital, you get a bunch of money taken from you, right? Am I correct?
Yep, that's exactly how
so exactly, yeah. Understand that's an American like way of looking at things, and that it is designed as in a political system where if you go to the hospital, you have to pay money, right?
Yeah.
So understand that. And then you have games like Call of Duty, which is funny when people say like shooting games are not political, because war is the most political thing there is.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, there's a thing recently where you go through like a trailer park in in one of the recent Call of Duty games, and apparently if you point your gun at civilians, it tells you that's what you do to de-escalate the situation. That was a thing that I haven't played the game personally, but that's a big thing that came up on the news cycle the other day, a few like months ago or something like that. But those are all from like very specific political and Americanized perspectives. Now let's go and talk about Pokemon. And Pokemon is a game where if you go anywhere and go to the Pokemon Center, you get free healthcare, which is how it's like that in Japan and a lot of places in the world. And so understand that in America, you make a game where you go to the hospital, it's assumed you have to pay, and that's part of the political and the cultural sort of understanding of those places. Whereas you go to a game that's made at any other place, okay, if you go to the hospital, okay, you get healed. That's a completely sort of it's a small thing, but it's sort of a political perspective that's fueled by the circumstances and the societies around them. And so when it comes to I can't say every single game that gets it right or gets it wrong, because there's plenty of critique you can run on every single game on that. Yeah. But there's like a lot of small games that, especially on the indie space, that try to at least talk specifically about certain topics. One, I just did a lecture about this yesterday, and like one of the like some of the games I recommend to people to look at is the guy who made Loneliness, Jordan Magnuson. He actually made something called the Game Trekking Omnibus, which has a whole bunch of different games around different sorts of cultural and historical issues around mostly places in Asia. And then there's also like a game called Unmanned by Mole Industria. There's Hush, which is supposed to be a typing game about the Rwandan genocide. There's a game called Iced, which I don't think actually is playable anymore, but it was about immigration and deportation in America, which I don't really think it was very good at that at the gameplay aspect of it, but I do appreciate like what it's going for. But like there are some small games that do try to do this sort of thing. I would like to see more people do more games about these sort of important cultural issues and commentary on them, because I think that they are a very powerful way for us to have some sort of discussion and be able to talk about these very controversial issues. And I think a lot of people in the gaming sphere are very afraid of trying to do anything that is like controversial, and I say that we should embrace it because people are going to complain about it anyway. And I think that it's really brave and important for people to make games, not to toot my own horn, like Civic Story, because I want people to, I want to see more games that teach me about the world and show me about histories and cultures and different sorts of societal problems that we could figure out if we all better understood the issue.
I absolutely love what you had to say just in the opening of that answer of contrasting the economic systems of Grand Theft Auto versus Pokemon or the healthcare systems, because I mean, you're absolutely right that even just the way that health is managed, the way that you regenerate, the way that, you know, you get items, the way that communities is connected. I mean, as a game developer, in a sense, you are like a god of this universe, and your political bias is being imparted into everything, into all these different mechanics, whether you're conscious of it or not. And it's inspiring because I've always kind of in the back of my mind wanted to develop a game. I think that the moment that I mean, to be honest, like hearing you talk about it, it's like getting me excited because the moment that gave me that, oh wow, like games can really sort of be more than just shooty bang bang. I was playing a VR game. I can't remember what it was called. It was like Far From Home or something like that. But it was just a game where you could be in the homes that have been destroyed through the war in the Middle East, and just touring through and stepping in and seeing it in VR was sort of a surreal experience, and it really started to, you know, make me think about the different possibilities of doing this in game development. And I kind of want to now pivot to game development because, you know, you created Civic Story with yourself and, you know, probably a small team of folks. How would you describe this process of making Civic Story? Was it like grueling? Was it a breeze? And what was, from the moment that you started, like, did you know that, all right, this is going to be like a huge time commitment, like 8 hours every day? Or was it like, we're going to do it in chunks, a couple hours every day? Like, how did your life change? Like once you knew that I'm developing this thing?
So before I answer that question, I just want to say entirely that if I say in most cases, it means my team. I don't want to be seen as the big auteur thing that takes credit for everybody's work, because and every big single person on my team was such an amazing help, and was like, honestly, the game would not only would the game not be made without them, but it would be even worse without them. Like they all contributed so many ideas and were so instrumental, and I really loved working with them. So like they all deserve spotlight too. But in terms of what you're asking, not really much change in terms of my personal life, because it was in my career, and this is like a weird thing about my career, I do a whole lot of different things. I make comics, I make illustrations, I make videos and animations, I do consulting, I do a whole lot of teaching, and so and like adding just, and I work on some games sometime in the middle of that. So I mean, like that didn't change. The only thing that really changed was like the fact that you have to make sure you have milestones to hit and make sure that you have keep track of the money and make sure everybody is paid. That's really the only different thing that has changed. Other than that, it was just like I have to meet with my team like once a week, and meet with my team once a week, and then make sure that I am working on things. And it's really like any other project to me. Like that, the only difference is that it had a lot of money that I had to shell out, and I had to get money from funding for other places in order to make sure that it was viable. So I mean, like it's really it was really just a gigantic project and not really a special thing for me. The only thing that made it special was just that it was this gigantic project that I've been dreaming of for the last how many years, and I have to be the one to actually like push it forward. So it's was a very relatively, I'm not going to say it's a painless or an easy process for sure. Games are very, very hard to make. Any game is, but it was relatively smooth. My team really worked together. We all jabbed really well together. We all shared ideas, and we all were able to like easily communicate with each other. So that was actually, it was honestly one of the least effort productions in terms of, and I don't mean effort as in like actual effort. I mean effort as in problems you have with many other productions where you have to start chasing people and all this other stuff and all other things. So I didn't have to do that. My team was amazing. So that was great. The biggest problems that we had though was that we kept running into bugs. And these were really weird bugs because they were like, some of them were stuff that we did and we just had to fix, and that's just process. But some of it was stuff that was a problem with the Unity engine, and we had no way to fix it, and we had to find different weird ways and workarounds to try and like get around the problem. And the funny thing is, like, our game is not very complicated. It was designed that way. It's a 3D visual novel. You use point and click controls. There is not anything that's too mechanically complicated like you would see in like a big end game. But we ran into so many like weird issues, and we're like, oh, I guess the Unity engine is messing up. Okay, I guess we have to figure out some sort of way to figure out why it's happening, if we can, or what we can do about it. That became really hard sometimes, but the team was able to mostly just sort of work it out. So it took us a long time, but yeah, we were able to figure it out through our own collaboration.
So for you had this team that was really instrumental in making Civic Story a reality. How would you advise people who want to take a crack at making games? So this is partly advice for me, but also people who, all right, I'm doing this solo, I'm trying to do this on my own. What resources and tips would you recommend for first-time devs starting from scratch?
Starting from scratch?
Yeah.
My first suggestion, don't do it solo. I've done solo dev. It is soul-crushing because if there becomes something that you don't understand why it's happening, then you're going to be hitting your head against a wall for hours and hours and days, and sometimes in weeks or months, trying to figure out what the problem is. And the thing is about game development, which is that game development, at least in my point of view, is not a singular thing. It is a fusion of countless different disciplines, fields, and knowledge bases. And this talks about, and I tell my students this all the time, like there's like graphics is just one end, and graphics can be an entire field, and that can be an entire career for you. But then there's also programming, and then there's several subsets of programming, and then there is also like technical arts, so making the shaders so it actually looks like it's a cartoon or it looks like really realistic. Like all of that is an entire different process, and solo dev is a lot if you have to do that all by yourself. And I personally don't like doing it anymore. I even when I was a solo dev like years ago, I leaned on help from all sorts of different people in my network to try and figure out things, especially programming, because that's my weakest aspect. And so I would recommend, like, if you want to get into game development, start thinking about the stuff that you want to learn. But I would also say, like, thinking about all the other roles that you would have to work alongside and dip your feet into them each, because the best thing that you could do as a game developer is have even the slightest understanding of other fields that are not going to be your own, even if you are working with other people. One thing that I think is really important, especially as somebody who's a game director, is that you have a good understanding of all the roles that other people are doing, because a lot of really bad directors in many different sort of productions don't, and then they sort of expect things to just sort of get done like magic, where if the thing is, like, if I'm like, thing is, I'm a terrible programmer, I will admit that off the bat, but if I am employing a programmer, I need to have a basic understanding of how programming works, and then I need to have, just so that not only I can explain stuff to them, they can explain stuff to me and I can understand. And then also, when I tell my programmer, hey, I need you to do this, I have an understanding of how long that's going to take and any sort of problems that they might have. So that way, the programmer can be supported if there is something that goes wrong or something that needs to sort of be adjusted or addressed, because I have a good understanding of that. I have dabbled in basically every sort of part of game dev to some small degree. I mostly specialize in the design and visual aspect, but I also can program if I really want to, and so I also have a basic understanding of how shaders work and all these other things, and so I can help my studio team and also advise them properly. And so if you are going to get into games, do try and try every single part of the process, be it, like, how do you design things, how do you program things, how do you make models, how do you make 2Drs, how do you even write for an interactive context. Try and dabble into all those things, because having an understanding of those is going to be crucial to your understanding of game development and working with other people.
Well, I guess my dream of solo developing a rhythm fighting game is not going to happen.
I mean, hey, it could. I'm not saying it can't. I'm just saying, if you want to have sanity by the end of the process, I would recommend getting a team together. And the thing is, I think not only is that important, I actually think it makes your game better, because even though I've been thinking about Civic Story for years, and I've had the basic idea, and I had like the design document for years, there's some stuff in the design document there's stuff that in the game that wasn't in the design document. That was all contributions from my team, and they thought of things and came up with ideas I never thought of, and were like, oh yeah, that actually would be a cool idea. Sometimes I approved it, sometimes I didn't. It all depends on the circumstances. But the game was so enhanced by all the people on my team suggesting all these different weird and wacky and cool ideas that it definitely would not be the same without them. And even if you are doing solo dev, the worst thing you can do is to rely on yourself to test the game. So you want to be able to have other people test it to tell you if any of this makes any sense.
Yeah, you don't want to be in your own head thinking that this is the best thing ever, but you just haven't got anybody else to actually take a look at it.
Yeah, I've been around the games community here in Toronto for a very long time now, and I find that ever since my student days, and I find that a lot of student games are obsessed with this idea that if you show a game at a conference, everybody's gonna want you breathing down the other person's neck to tell them how the game works, and nobody likes that. That is a huge staple I see at so many conferences, and nobody likes it. I want to just play the game and understand it. And when I started showcasing my games at events, I told myself I'm not doing that. So what I ended up doing was I made my own controller, and it was just because the game that I was making, which was it was originally created for a psychology test game, because it was just moving around and pressing a button. I made a big red box controller that was just a joystick and a button. And yeah.
Wow.
I actually have it if you want to see it, but it's on my website.
Yeah, I'd love to check it out.
Yeah, I mean, give me 2 seconds. I'll go get it.
Sure.
Here it is. This is what I would use at events because why not? It makes it so that even if I'm not around, nobody's asking, how do I control this thing?
Wow, that's genius.
Yeah, so I made this, and I actually was just showing this again at University of Toronto, Mississauga, because I was guest speaking there yesterday. So yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad that you're talking about the development process, because next I want to actually talk about the gaming industry at large, because over the last 5-10 years of gaming, we've seen so many different changes within the industry. A lot of AAA games have landed a lot of controversial headlines, whether it's bad launches, whether it's toxic work environments, whether it's racism in the workplace. While on the other hand, you're seeing a huge growth in the indie development space, where a lot of indie devs are becoming just as competitive and successful as some of these huge AAA games that are launching. When you look at the evolving gaming industry, what impact do you want to see your company, Shining Spark Entertainment, make?
In terms of the company, I have a more complicated question. If you're talking I have a more complicated answer if this is a question about the industry itself. In terms of my company, though, I would like Shining Spark Entertainment to essentially be a leader in showcasing how it's possible to educate people and talk about these different types of very sensitive and sometimes even culturally taboo topics to talk about, so we can start having those conversations and thinking about how we can actually, in the real world, affect them, and learning just about the world in general. I think that those are really important things that I don't really think we associate with games specifically. I often say that I often say that a romance novel can touch your heart, a horror movie can scare you, and a documentary can teach you something about the world. Why don't we think of games in that same way? And so I want Shining Spark to sort of be a leader on making games that do talk about those different sorts of topics that go along different genres, because I personally don't think that games need to be fun. I think they need to be engaging. And I sometimes think that we are so obsessed with fun as an industry, it holds us back from exploring what games can actually be otherwise. And that exploring all these different sorts of topics like politics and racism and all these other things, because there's so much potential for that we're leaving on the table because it does not immediately serve the purposes of commercialism and capitalism. So those are the types of experiences I would love to inspire. And I would also like to inspire people to give a chance to different types of games they might not necessarily immediately try. And I'm talking not even just to gameplay people, I'm talking about non-game people who don't like video games normally, or don't think of video games as something that they want to do, because I designed Civic Story to explicitly be accessible to people who are not necessarily game players. It's designed specifically because it's a point and click game that's easy to control, so that even if you were playing someone like a parent was playing it, they could easily get into it. And I think that is the sort of change I would like to inspire in this industry, so that we have more of these diverse experiences that teach us about the world, that talk about different sort of things, and get people passionate and caring about all these different things that affect us and affect our lives.
And if we're looking at sort of the trajectory of your work, your company, what would you say is the pie in the sky game? If you had an unlimited budget, any team that you wanted, what does that ultimate game look like?
It looks like Civic Story. I did not have the all the budget in the world, of course. I had the budget I had, and I made the most of it. But I think Civic Story was the dream game for me, and that doesn't mean I don't want to make other games. There are other ideas that I have. I would love to make a few games. There's actually one I pitched the other day that was a spin-off of Civic Story. There's a few games I would love to go and talk about. So, like, for example, there's games I want to make that talk about health and war and like different sort of circumstances around war and other sort of things. And the but right now it's just like right now I'm sort of in like break mode because that was a long development cycle, and so a long development cycle of the past like 2.5 years. So it was right now I'm just sort of thinking about the stuff that I want to do, and then I will be trying to make it happen in sometime in the future.
That's really exciting. So let's transition real quick over to politics specifically, because Civic Story is very political in nature. So I'm curious to know if, let's say, for example, Civic Story became adopted by a Canadian educational authority as sort of a resource to teach people about civic engagement, for example. If you could design and help implement better laws, better policies over in Canada, how would you sort of reimagine the political system, especially as somebody who's a game designer and you're sort of creating this world? How would you then translate over to the real world?
That's a very like interesting question. I'm not sure I can answer, but in terms of let me just think for a second. In terms of sorry, I'm just gonna make sure I can think of a right answer for this.
No worries. I mean, like, I guess the way that I'm sort of looking at it is similar to the example that you were talking about with GTA. The fact that Americans see this system as a natural thing, having to pay to go to the doctors. These are small policy changes, not small policy changes, but these are policies that are different in different countries. And so for you, are there any particular policies that you feel like, we need to either lower the voting age limit, we need to have ranked choice voting? Do you see any policies that you feel like would optimize the way that we currently govern?
That's good. That's an interesting one. I'm not really sure I have particularly a sort of a horse in that race in terms of like, this is exactly how I want things to go. Because I think like in terms of the way that Civic Story was designed and the reason I made it, it was not necessarily to say that things should be done like this, because I'm accepting that things are as they are currently, because I don't really think we can have that capacity for change if we don't understand how things are going right now. And so we have all this sorts of misinformation, we have fake news, we have people shouting buzzwords over things they have no understanding of, and we have people who just don't understand their own democracy. Like, for example, here in Canada, we live so close to the US, we consume a lot of your American movies and media. We love it. We love that stuff. But it has tainted our entire understanding of how things work in our country. I'll give you an example. And I brought this because I think I knew I was going to end up having to bring this up. We end up having people in Canada who, when they start being a nuisance, they start touting their First Amendment rights, right? Mm-hmm. We don't have that in Canada. That's an entirely American cultural and political concept. Instead, we have this, which is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a 34-page document embedded in our Constitution that says the rights and freedoms of all people in Canada. And that is what like. If you're talking about First Amendment, technically, I think the First Amendment in Canada was something around like Manitoba is a province, but we don't have that in Canada. But people don't know about this, about the all like the rights and freedoms that they have that protect them from all sorts of different things. And we are very Americanized. We don't understand our own country and how it works. We don't even understand how our own elections work. And that becomes a problem because then nobody cares. In Canada, we are very notorious for having a very, very, very low voter turnout. It's like abysmal. Here in Toronto, we had an election last fall for the mayor, and like not even like around like only 30% of the people showed up.
Wow.
To vote, and that guy ended up dropping a few months ago, and we had to have another mayoral election, and it was only maybe about a 10% difference. Our voter turnout is terrible, and nobody understands politics over here, especially if they do. They are only care about the American side. They don't care about the stuff that's happening in their backyard at any level. And then we have it so that only a few people vote, and the people who showed up, those are if you can get like 20% of the vote, and that will make you win, because that is if only say a few percentage of the people actually showed up. And so that is a problem here, and that bodes not really well for our democracy. We can't solve any of our own problems or change any of our laws in a way that benefits people if we end up having corruption because only a few people showed up to vote and they voted for that guy. We are running with that problem right now in Ontario quite a bit. But we can't as a society decide that we want all these things, like we want to do certain issues certain way, that we want healthcare to be like this, that we want us to have even ranked choice voting, because we don't. Can't have that if nobody is aware and nobody is voting. And Civic Story was designed as a sort of an interactive new way to try and get people to do that, because I haven't seen anybody try that yet. And trying to get people interested in politics is really hard. And nobody, you try and tell people like, this percent of this thing will happen because of this thing, and this guy wants to do that. Nobody relates to numbers. They relate to feelings, and they relate to things that they actually feel and experience. And that's why I wanted to make a video game about politics so people can understand what's going on. And I wanted it to be very welcoming, like making it comedic, because we often consume news and things that are going on through comedy, through like SNL and Mad TV and all these other things and different sorts of late night shows, and trying to make a way for people to do that, because as a people we don't know what we want anymore, because nobody bothers to vote, and we cannot decide how better to do things if if not only if people are not voting, but also if nobody cares to vote. And of course the people who get elected don't care about whatever the shady stuff they're going to do, because no one's going to vote them out. So that's the type of change I would like. I don't necessarily want a change to our political system personally. I think that could happen as a result of people getting involved and people getting their voice out. But I do want people to actually just have that voice in the first place and be able to be active participants in our democracy and care about all these things that are going on, so we can actually have a better world for everybody.
It was really cool in playing the game, having that opportunity to actually, play out what, largely my job had been. Your game, you start off working at a marketing company, writing these articles. I am in marketing. I've done a lot of headline writing, so a lot of this is eerily familiar. And I was like, whoa. But I think it's so important, because headline writing and copywriting is very, it's a deceptively telling exercise when it comes to showcasing your bias, showcasing the angle that you want to sort of, you're going to do this sensationally, you're going to try to rile people up emotionally. Because like you said, it's really difficult to get people into politics unless you try to make something very sensational, unless you try to make something, gossip friendly. So I think this game is really important, and I think just the message that you're bringing with gaming as a medium to teach people things that they, like civic engagement, getting people involved, because otherwise a lot of the methods that we have right now just don't tend to work. But I want to be able to, play through this game, learn more about this, but unfortunately we are running out of time. I did have a couple questions remaining. I want to do a quick rapid fire, so I wanted to get your opinion and your rating out of 5.
I have time, so feel free.
Perfect. So I'm gonna list out 10 games. You can tell me a quick opinion you have of it, and then give me a rating out of 5. If you haven't played it, let me know. All right, you ready?
Okay. Yeah.
First game, Elden Ring.
Haven't played it.
Second game, Cyberpunk.
Have not played that.
Third game, any of the BioShock series.
I played the first one. It was pretty good.
Rating out of 5.
4.
4. All right. D. Any of the games from the Call of Duty series.
I mean, I've played those games. I enjoy them as blockbuster action things. But I mean, like, it depends. If you're talking to me about politically, they're terrible. But I mean, like, if you're playing like a blockbuster action thing, like, it's fun. Like, I'll give it a 3.
All right. Next game, Baldur's Gate 3.
Have not played that yet.
Next game, Elder Scrolls Skyrim.
I actually didn't like it. I mean, I thought I'm not saying it's a bad game. It just was not my thing.
Yeah.
I would give it like personally, I give it like a 2. I don't think it's a bad game by any means. It just did not click for me.
Fair. All right. Next game, the Final Fantasy series.
5. Love those games.
Next game, the Metal Gear series.
I love what those games thematically represent. It was another thing where I was like, I love the story of these games. I just could not get into them gameplay wise. But I did absolutely adore Revengeance.
Rating
overall, I'll give it a 4.
And the next game, The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom.
I have not played it. There's so many games in the last few years I have not gotten to play because I was busy making this and also doing other work. So, but
fair,
I mean,
fair.
like, yeah, and then I'm also like doing a whole lot of teaching at the college and all that other stuff. So
no worries. And then finally, Minecraft.
Minecraft didn't click with me. I'll give it a 3. Although back to that Legend of Zelda thing, I did absolutely adore Breath of the Wild, so that's a 5.
Perfect.
I just haven't had the time to play Tears of the Kingdom. So I actually literally just bought it the other day. I just haven't had the time to start it yet.
Okay. Because I had a feeling like it's such a compared to Breath of the Wild, it's such a creatively rich game with all the building and the. I haven't even gotten to the meat of like the engineering with all the different motors. Like,
all my friends were gushing about it, but because it came out at the time when I was deep in development for Civic Story, I'm like, I cannot play this game until I finish Civic Story because I spent like almost 200 hours in Breath of the Wild.
Yeah,
I am not getting anything done
same.
if I start playing it. So, in terms of like other things I do want to mention though, like in terms of Civic Story though, is that I do think it's a really interesting game, not only as a way to learn about politics, and I also to learn about how different countries do things, because I find a lot of the politics is actually very much Americanized.
Mm-hmm.
We end up having a lot of people in Canada who are only familiar with American politics and not the stuff that's going on here. We have all sorts of different games that sort of feel like American politics is the natural state of things. And I think that it will help if other countries are able to understand their own politics or how other countries do things, because American politics is kind of its own different type of thing that's exclusive to America. And a lot more countries actually have a lot more in common politically with how Canada does things. But the American stuff is seen as the most commercially viable. I actually got, when I was having conversations about funding and with other advisors, like I was told several times that this will see seen as more commercially viable if you make it about American politics. I was like, no, I have no desire to do that.
I love that.
So like, so I think that it's a really interesting way for people to get more familiar with other things in the world. And even if you aren't a Canadian, I think a lot of the stuff in there is still valuable and relevant to other places in the world as well.
That's really exciting. So are we going to anticipate a Civic Story DLC from different countries, different places?
So that is a possibility. We'll see. But I will say though, and I'm not sure if we have time to talk about this, that things have become a little bit more complicated because of the recent Unity news. I'm not sure if you're familiar. So this past week, I'm not sure when this is going to get posted, but this past week, we got a bomb dropped on us because Unity, which is the company that makes one of the bigger, the Unity engine, which is one of the big game engines that a lot of people around the world use, was basically going to change their policy so that now they're going to charge the game developers an unknown amount for every install every install that you goes on somebody else's computer after a certain point. And every game developer was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And also that's terrible. And it also has just been, if you look in discourse, like all the sort of discourse in game development news recently, like that has gotten a whole bunch of people to be very skeptical about using Unity in the future for any projects, because now it actually isn't commercially viable. If you end up in a state where your game is extremely successful and it actually does like get to that threshold, they're going to start charging you for existing, and you can't calculate that. It's one thing if it's like a revenue share where it's like, okay, you make this amount, we're going to take this amount because we made the engine. Sure, fine. But it's like, oh, if somebody installs it on one computer and then installs it on another computer, then installs it on their Steam Deck, then installs it on their PlayStation, and installs then it's like, what? Like that is completely untenable. And so because of that, my week has been like figuring out, oh, what does the future of my game dev business actually look like now? Because either you stick with that and stick with Unity, and you hope you end up succeeding well, but not in the realm that they're going to start charging you. Or you end up in a having to change game engines, which is a big problem because that means that all your knowledge from the other engine and also all your tools are now invalid. And so that's been a weird thing that a lot of the game dev world has been struggling with for the past few days. It's been a very weird thing, and nobody really seems to know what to do with it. People are jumping ship to other engines, but it's like you have to start spending a whole lot of time trying to get understanding that engine now, because it's not going to work like Unity. All the game engines have their own little quirks, and because Unity has basically given no real details about this and contradicted themselves every time everybody's like snapped at them about it, we don't really know what's going on. And so for example, I had a few game ideas that would have spun off from Civic Story or use some of our old assets as well. Now I have to wonder how viable that is. And if I have to switch engines, now I have to figure out, what engine I have to use, and what we can do about that. And it's one of those things that doesn't always sound like too much bad when it comes to like somebody who doesn't like the people who more play games rather than actually make them. But it is crucial to the people who actually make the games that everybody enjoys. And now a lot of game developers are not sure what to do about that. It's sort of rocked the entire game development world, and indies especially. Indies have widely adopted Unity, and there's a lot of places who are still making games who they're kind of locked into this now because they have spent several years on the Unity engine finishing a game, and that's not going to get done for another year or two. And now they have to deal with this. And even the people who just finished a game for the past several years might have to deal with this, because Unity's also not telling us how they're tracking installs either. And they won't tell us about it. They say it's trust us. We're gonna track it properly. And so that's been a weird thing. So it's whether or not like I would love to make some more like some DLC. I already had some ideas, and I would even love to make like stuff like language support as well. That was in the cards. Things have had to be very much reevaluated this past week for further development for everybody. It's been a weird situation.
Wow, that is terrifying. I mean, there's probably untold numbers of developers who are like, should we just like pull the game? Like, we're afraid of like.
Actually, have you ever heard of Call of the Lamb?
Yeah, my wife loves that game.
Yeah, they actually tweeted when this came out this week. We're gonna delist the game on January.
Like, completely?
Yeah, that's what they announced, because they are Call of the Lamb is big enough that would immediately hit that game. And so
wow.
that's the sort of thing. And nobody's sure how it's counted. Nobody's sure, like, even if for people who make free, like little free games that are downloaded or played on like online, like how does that affect them? Like, these are like small little studios that maybe they may or may not get money through microtransactions, but nobody knows. And right now we're kind of in a waiting period to see if they walk it back and what's going to happen, because that came out of absolutely nowhere, I believe, on like Monday or Tuesday this week.
Jeez. Wow. Well, I'm sorry about the news. Jesus, that is
yeah,
that is a lot.
But game development is a very weird place right now. But I mean, like, I love making games around the stuff I like making stuff about different types of cultural topics. I have to at this point, because I mean, I got like my master's in studying that and making stuff about like that. So like it's but I mean, I hope to continue making games around these sort of things. I definitely will be teaching people about making games around these sort of things through like the different places that I work. I like the Hand-Eye Society and at Humber and any other place that I end up teaching at. So it's but I hope that more people end up making more games that talk about political things and getting people to be more excited or knowledgeable about these different sorts of topics.
Awesome. Well, everybody, you can go ahead and pick up Civic Story over on Steam. Where else can they download it?
Yeah, so they can download it on Steam. They can also download it on itch.io. If you're not aware, itch.io is also like, it's like if Steam and YouTube had a baby. It is anybody can go and upload games there. But you can download it. You can download it on Steam. You can download it on Itch, and you can also check out my work at grindspark.com, as well as the website for Shining Spark Entertainment called shiningsparkint.com. And yeah, you feel free to support us by checking out Civic Story, playing it. We would love to hear your thoughts on it, because it might actually be very different from a lot of your experiences with politics, especially because our politics are wildly different than some countries, and we even have like 5 major political parties instead of 2. So it's supposed to be a really eye-opening experience for a lot of people and help people understand all the stuff that they hear on the news and inspire people to vote and have better civic literacy.
Awesome. Well, Jordan, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today, learning about game development, learning about your story. You're always welcome back on the podcast. Before we head out, what other projects are you working on?
Right now, I'm taking a small little bit of a break from like personal projects, because wow, Civic Story took a lot out of me. That being said, though, there are a few projects I really want to put into practice for Shining Spark Entertainment in the relatively near future, when we figure out what's going on with this Unity stuff. But right now, you can definitely find out all the latest stuff that I have been working on. You can find out through following me on Twitter at Super Spark Plugs or Super Spark Plug on Blue Sky. You can also just keep a track on grindspark.com, which is my portfolio page. So I tend to post a lot of my personal work on there, and also it even has like links to like my other socials, like my Twitch, my DeviantArt, and all that other stuff. So you can definitely go to grindspark.com as a one-stop shop for anything that is me and all my other socials.
All right, Jordan. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.